Father in heaven.
We probably all recall a children's song entitled This Little Light of Mine. It's been around for a long time. I can remember as a small boy singing this song, and I think it goes back even farther than that. Sometimes we as older folks, we get a little bit embarrassed if we sing that song. I remember I'd sing this song occasionally down at Salem, especially for whenever we had singing. I'd do that for especially the younger folks. And I'd say, okay, let's get our lights up. And you see all the adults, and they're doing this. They're keeping it down low. So it's like they're a little bit embarrassed about holding their finger up in the air. But we need to keep in mind that although this is a children's song, it is based upon Scripture. In fact, the passage of Scripture we just read a moment ago, found in Matthew 5, verses 14 through 16. Obviously, we're talking about our influence, our spiritual influence that we have, the individuals that we interact with on a daily basis. We want people to see Jesus living in us. We want people to see God living in us, and that we're living our lives in accordance with His will. That's what it means to allow our light to shine. In that song, there's one verse that talks about not hiding under a bushel, and we don't do that. And we don't let Satan blow it out. And although that's kind of designed for children, nevertheless, it identifies with some very important themes that we need to be reminded of from time to time. That we don't want the devil extinguishing our spiritual light. Jesus once said that He is the light, and that He came to a very dark world to illuminate it and to provide light. And so there's a lot of various examples that I think that we can make from this and from the passage of Scripture that we read of in Matthew 5. One thing that's interesting, and I think I've commented on this before, is that Jesus also uses a couple of metaphors. He refers to salt and light. In fact, Matthew 5, verse 13, you are the salt of the earth. Matthew 5:14, you are the light of the world. And we might scratch our heads a little bit and say, well, what does that mean? I'm like salt. And, of course, we've all heard the little catchphrase, well, you're the salt of the earth. And then we say, well, in what way am I the light of the world? One of the things I want us to understand is that a few observations that we can make about salt and light is that salt is hidden, light is visible. Think about that. We use salt. A lot of times salt in the food that we eat, we have to sometimes be worried about our sodium intake, especially if you have some problems with high blood pressure. And you can be eating all kinds of foods. You can go out to a restaurant, and you're not, obviously there's a salt shaker or those little packets they give you, and you can sprinkle the salt on, but a lot of times salt is included in the ingredients of whatever that you're eating. And so we got to be careful about that. Food that we buy at the grocery store, a lot of in cans, whatever, there's salt. Salt is a preservative. We're well aware of that. So a lot of salt we consume, and we're not really aware that we're doing it. We might taste it. Something tastes salty, but it works on the inside of the body. Now, light is a little more visible. We can see that. We walk into a dark room, and we flip the switch, and we have light. Now, let me ask you a question. Have you ever walked into a room and say, well, I'm going to turn on the dark? That doesn't make sense, does it? You don't turn on the dark. What we do is to eliminate the dark is we turn on the light. Light vanquishes the dark. And so we see that without God, without Christ, without His Word, then the world is plunged in darkness. And we're beginning to see that now in our society, in our culture today, and a lot of the things that we see going on around us is that people are drifting farther away from God. We discussed some of this in our study in Romans, the first chapter, about how Christians and people who once followed God, if they drift back into the world, they plunge themselves back into darkness. And whenever we say, well, that's it, I've had enough with God, and I've I've decided I don't want anything more to do with Jesus Christ. I don't want anything more to do with the church. I don't want anything more to do with the Bible. We're plunging ourselves in darkness. It's literally like shadows beginning to form over our heads. As we said, salt works from within, light works from without. Salt is largely negative. It preserves by slowing corruption or can create thirst. Light is more positive. It not only reveals what is wrong, but helps produce what is right and gives direction. Sometimes people say, well, we need to shed a little more light on this so we can get to the truth. Sometimes they try to do that in a courtroom. Did someone who's accused of a crime, did they or did they not commit that crime? And that's what that whole trial is all about, to try to discover the truth and focus light on the truth. Truth exposes what's really going on. Without light, what happens? You ever try to walk in a dark room? You get up in the middle of the night and say, well, I don't want to disturb anyone, and I kind of remember the layout of the room, so I won't turn on any light. And the first thing you do is you stub your toe on something, and then and then you wake the whole household up because you're making a loud noise. Or you stumble over furniture, and so you find out, well, I need to have a little bit of light. Now that we got our cell phones, we can just kind of turn those on, and it kind of gives us a little dim light, enough at least to be able to see and maneuver around all the furniture. So we need light. And that's true in our spiritual walk here on this earth. We need some light. And without God, we're just kind of fumbling around in the darkness. As we've already said, light, one observation we can make is that light conquers darkness. In John the 8th chapter, verse 12, and therefore Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in the darkness, but shall have the light of life. Think about that, the light of life. Now, Jesus Christ is the only one who could provide that kind of spiritual illumination. I can't do that. All I can do is tell you what Jesus said. What I may think is really not that important. In Psalm 119, verse 105, the Word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. I've sometimes wondered what it would be like, if you lived back in the 1800s, before electricity, before flashlights. Sometimes people, something happened, maybe they have some livestock issues, and so they got to walk to the barn from the house, and it's just dark. I mean, it's not like you got some utility light on or outdoor lights on the house. And if you were out in the country, without the moon or something, it could be really, really dark. So you'd have to use a lantern. Candles usually didn't work because any kind of a little breeze or whatever would blow the candle out. And I don't know if you've ever tried to walk with a lantern, but you've only got a little bit of light just in front of you. It's not like a flashlight. But that's all they had, and they learned to use it. But at least that lantern would give you enough light to make sure that you could see a little bit in front of you so that you didn't stumble over anything. Well, we can see in Psalm 119, verse 130, the unfolding of thy words gives light. It gives understanding of the simple. Now, this is the New American Standard Bible version, but what's interesting is this word unfolding. And if we were to look at it a little more closely, in the original language, it means an opening, an unfolding, an entrance, a doorway. So the Word gives light. It gives us a doorway to God. It gives us an entrance so that we can understand Him. Well, we can also see that light provides us color, drabness and dullness. I know sometimes maybe I don't have a lot of light on in my bedroom. I'm getting up and getting dressed, and so I'll go to my dresser and pull out a pair of socks, and without a lot of light, I'm thinking, okay, are these black? Are these brown? Are these blue? Because without a lot of light, if it's a dark color, it's hard to tell. You can't really see the color. It could be black, it could be brown, or some other color. And so, but then if I turn on the overhead light, boom! Oh, that's black, that's brown, I can see colors. So we need light to help us to be able to see with clarity and get beyond the drabness and dullness. I don't think God ever expected our service to Him, our worship experience, to be described by such terms as drabness and dullness. And we need to really work against that. And the way we work with that is we bring in the light from God and Christ. In Philippians 1, verse 27, only conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or remain absent, I may hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel. He tells us here that we need to conduct ourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel. Well, to be able to do that, to walk in a worthy manner as a Christian, to be worthy of God and Jesus Christ, we need their light. We need to be able to see where we're going. In Ephesians 4, verses 1 through 2, Paul says, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, entreat you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling with which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, in showing forbearance to one another in love. The light also changes deadness. In Luke 1, verses 78 through 79, because of the tender mercy of our God, with which the sunrise from on high shall visit us, to shine upon those who sit in darkness and the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. Sunrise is a very special time. I can remember as a small boy, I went through a period of time where, occasionally, not every night, but occasionally I'd have a nightmare. And to me, the most frightening and scary nightmares were the ones where I thought I was awake, just lying in my bed, and then something would happen. And it seemed so real. Seemed so real. And so you have a couple of those experiences, and sometimes it seems like it'd just be one right after another in one night. I don't know what caused it. But then you start trying to stay awake. Well, I'm scared. I'm not going to go sleep. But inevitably, you would fall asleep. And I remember that when finally dawn, when it would start to light up in my room, I'd have a sigh of relief. The light just kind of pushed back all those fears that I had, because now I could see. I wasn't in the dark. And so that's what God can do for us. Sometimes life can get very, very scary and frightening. But yet His light, His truth, can help push all that away. In Matthew 4, verse 16, the people who were sitting in darkness saw a great light, and those who were sitting in the land and shadow of death, upon them a light dawned. That's who Jesus Christ is. And let's face it, this world, this earth today in some places is a pretty dark place. I was just reading about an article in one of the countries in Africa, and we see so many of those countries struggle, and it's teenage girls are being captured and taken and raped. We're hearing phrases again such as ethnic cleansing, and which we've heard before in the past. And we just wonder, how people can be so barbaric and so monstrous in treating people like this. Well, without God in our lives, that's what happens. That's what we found out in our study in Romans 1, is that we begin to drift away from God. We become more and more animal-like. We become more monstrous in the way that we behave. All these people are really concerned about is their own way of life and power. They want power. And to them, they justify it that it's an end, it's a means to the end. We see in Proverbs 15, verse 30, bright eyes gladden the heart. Good news puts fat on the bones. In Proverbs, we have these little statements and sayings, and I really like reading them because, even though they were written 1,000 years ago, we can see that they're still very timely and very relevant. Bright eyes gladdens the heart. It lifts our spirits when we can see. In the darkness, we can become depressed and despondent. And, have perhaps take all kinds of emotional toll upon us. In Proverbs 13, verse 9, the light of the righteous rejoices, but the lamp of the wicked goes out. People that are performing in a wicked manner often want to do this in the dark. That's why a lot of crimes, I'm not saying all crimes, but a lot of crimes are performed in the dark. Because people that are doing these kinds of things are more comfortable in the dark. Well, nobody's going to be able to identify me. I'll have the advantage, and I can sneak up on someone because they can't really see me. We can also see in Ecclesiastes 11 and verse 7, the light is pleasant and it is good for the eyes to see the sun. Well, something else that we can see is Jesus used the expression in our text about a city on a hill, something that's visible from a distance. You know, years ago when they used to build cities on a high hill or a high plateau, and there was good reason for that. There was some strategic reasons, because then you were able to see farther away. You were able to look at a long distance at your surroundings, so that if you had any enemies approaching, any armies or whatever, you'd get some advanced notice. Plus, it also made it harder for them to be able to attack the city that you lived in if it was set up on a hill. Plus, it could be seen from a distance. People could see them. In Proverbs 4, verses 18 and 19, but the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn that shines brighter and brighter until the full day. The way of the wicked is like darkness. They do not know over what they stumble. Philippians 2, verse 15, that you may prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, children of God, above reproach, in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights in the world. You know, if you start traveling around some of the coastal areas of the country, the East Coast or whatever, you'll see a lot of lighthouses. And we often think, well, you know, why do they still need lighthouses? And we see that a lot of people just enjoy looking at them, and sometimes there are tours, and there are a few that are still functional. In this day and age, we think, well, we don't really need lighthouses. Ships out there, they've got radar. They've got GPS. They've got radios. You go back 100 years ago, though, they didn't have all those things. And sometimes, you know, if it's dark and foggy, stormy, there's a ship out there. They're looking for the coast, but they can't see it. And they certainly don't want to wash up on the coast and have a shipwreck. And so they'd have these lighthouses. And they could see that light. And they would begin tracking on that light. I think that's just a really good example, type of metaphor for us. Jesus is our light. And sometimes this world can get pretty dark. And that's why we need to keep our eyes on Christ and on God through His Word. And that can help keep us out of the dark and guide us into the home port. Well, Jesus also talks about a light on a lampstand, that it fills the house with light. You know, we're really spoiled today because we have all the lights. We used to have incandescent lights. Now we got LED lights, and you know they're brighter than ever. We got lights overhead. We got lamps, and we've got flashlights now on our phone. We can turn it into a flashlight, and so we've just really been spoiled about all of these things. But it's interesting that if you're in total darkness, that even just a little bit of light can make a big difference in a candle or whatever. It makes a big, huge difference. And as he's saying here, that a light on a lampstand will fill the house with light. In Luke 8, verse 16, now no one after lighting a lamp covers it over with a container or puts it under a bed, but he puts it on a lampstand in order that those who come in may see the light. If you think a little bit, that's what we're supposed to be as Christians. We're kind of a light. We're to draw people to God and Christ. But to do that, we have to let our light shine. People have to know that we're Christians, that we believe in God and that our faith is in God. They need to see that and understand that. It's so important. But if we're not doing that, then we're not letting our light shine. In fact, it almost may sound like what Jesus warned us against is that we're not to be ashamed of Him or God, and that if we are, they're going to be ashamed of us in the day of judgment. So we want to fill other people with light. But let's face it, there's a lot of people out there who are hurting. There's a lot of people out there who need light. In 2 Corinthians 8 and verse 21, for we have regard for what is honorable, not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. As we've been saying, we're a signal to the lost. We're trying to signal to people. Our life is a kind of a signal. This way. This is the way to salvation. Let me help guide you to salvation. In Romans 12 and verse 2, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. You know, one of the things we value in life, and we respect people that can do the hard things. Would you pay 50 or 60 bucks to go watch, to go to one of these basketball stadiums and watch somebody just stand around out there making a few shots with nobody guarding them? No. I could do that. If I got a basketball goal in the backyard or on my driveway, I can do that. Why would I pay 50, 100 bucks to buy a ticket and go watch something? Anybody could do that. But maybe professional basketball team, guys flying through the air and slam dunking the basketball, they're doing hard things. And we'll pay. We'll pay to watch that. Same thing with baseball or whatever. Somebody who's able to get up and sing, has a beautiful voice. Not everybody can do that. They do the hard things. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin. Those names mean anything to you? They were the first two men that landed on the moon, walked around up there. That's a hard thing to do. And so, for the rest of their lives, wherever they went, people wanted to talk to them. They went and did a lot of lectures and a lot of speeches. And because they did a very, very hard thing. Well, Jesus did the hardest of them all. Came to this earth for us, died on the cross, suffered all of the indignity that he did, the humility, the mockery, did all of that. He did a very, very hard thing because he loved us. That commands respect from us. And that's a light. And we need to share that knowledge with other people around us as a signal. Letting them know they don't want to be like everyone else in the world. They don't want to just conform, but they want to be transformed. In 1 Peter 2, verse 9, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Well, in conclusion, I'd like for us to look at this. Ways we can turn off our light. And sometimes we turn off, and I'm talking about our spiritual lights, we turn them off without even knowing about it. Being quiet when we should speak. Sometimes we're having conversations with their friends and, maybe somebody's cracking some jokes about God and they don't believe that and they go on and on and on. And what do? Do we just stand there? Acting mute? And then we begin to reason to ourselves, well, it's not going to do any good and nobody's going to listen to me, and so why should I speak up and bring, perhaps they'll be a recipient to all kinds of hostility and mockery. Why should I do that? And you don't have to necessarily be, you say, well, I'm not a preacher and, I've not studied for years and so I don't know what I'm going to say and I can't quote a lot of Scripture. Maybe you can't. But you could say, you're wrong. I know there's a God. And I believe in him. You can make some very simple statements. And maybe people will laugh at you. They may. But at least they know where you stand. At least you're letting your light shine. And I think God will be proud of you for that. Because that takes a lot of courage. We can't allow ourselves to be quiet. We need to speak up when there is wrong in our midst. Well, something else. Going along with the crowd, doing what everyone else is doing. And this especially becomes a problem when you're a younger person and you're in school and you're in college and you want to be accepted by your peers and your friends, and nobody wants to be the outcast. We've talked about that before. And I think this is something that parents need to really drive home strongly to their children as they begin to age and as they go through childhood and then into the teen years. This is something that really needs to be hammered on about how important this is. Don't go along with the crowd. We need to discover that in most cases the crowd is wrong. Most of the time the crowd is wrong. And we always use that expression, well, if everyone jumped off a cliff, would you? You say that to one of your teenagers, they're going to roll their eyes and they say, well, who's going to jump off a cliff? Well, sometimes teenagers do something pretty similar. They go to a party and they all get high on drugs, or they see how much alcohol they can drink and consume. How many bottles? And they play all these drinking games. Oh, and it's just so much fun. And then every once in a while, we open up our newspapers and we read that in some college fraternity, some young man or woman dies of alcohol poisoning. They drank too much. A lot of people don't know that's possible, but you can. And people die. And the same thing with drugs. In a way, that's jumping off a cliff, isn't it? That's jumping off a cliff. And so you do that because all your friends are doing it. You think it'll be okay and you'll be cool. And some guys may say, well, I might get a girlfriend. And girls may say, well, maybe I can get a boyfriend. Do you really want a boyfriend or girlfriends doing all those kind of things? Do you think they may make a really good future husband or wife? Don't go along with the crowd. Think about it was the crowd that wanted to crucify Jesus, wasn't it? They thought that was a good idea. The Jewish crowd, they thought, well, this is a good idea. Jesus is a troublemaker. We want to kill him. We want to get rid of him. And so everyone is shouting, crucify him, crucify him. They all thought it was a good idea. All the apostles, including Peter, they thought it was a good idea to go run and hide when Jesus was captured. Let's just all run. So they all ran together. What made it worse for Peter is that he had arrogantly and boldly claimed that he'd never do that. But he did exactly that which he said he'd never do, that Jesus had predicted he would do. Denying the truth when it's inconvenient. Sometimes the truth's inconvenient. Sometimes the truth may get in the way of some things that maybe we want to do. Especially when all of the world and society is saying, well, a woman should have the choice and a right to have an abortion. It's her body. And if it's inconvenient, she does not have a baby in her womb. She's simply got a collection of cells. And so she should have a right to terminate it because it's not real. And so our politicians and lawmakers say, well, the baby is not really real until it is born and it's breathing. Now, once it takes its first breath, then it's a human being. We can read a passage of scriptures where God said, even when the child was in the mother's womb, he knew it. It had a soul. That tells us that life begins at conception and not birth. That can be inconvenient for someone, especially when someone has been foolish and they conceive and, well, I'm in college and I'm not set up to have a child and this is just inconvenient. And so what is the solution? Well, the baby's got to go because it's inconvenient. Sometimes we just need to look at the reality, the hard, cold facts. Allowing sin to have a dimming effect on our light. With light, a lot of flashlights, you can control the brilliance of your light, how intense it is. You can make it really bright, or you can dim it down, especially on some of the newer flashlights that we have. Some of us are dimming our spiritual light, and that's what sin does. In fact, sin can just completely turn off our light. And instead of projecting light, you know what we begin projecting? Shadows. That's what we begin to do. We're projecting shadows and darkness. We're doing the devil's work for him. We can't allow that to happen. We've got to keep our lights on. If you have any kind of a flashlight, what do you have to do? Well, if it's got batteries, you've got to exchange the batteries. If it has to be charged up, then you've got to charge up the batteries. Got to plug it in every once in a while to keep that light burning. Keep it on so the flashlight will work. Have you ever noticed the lights go off in the house? Well, where's that flashlight at? And so, everyone's kind of stumbling around, and usually in the kitchen somewhere in some door. Oh, here's the flashlight. And you switch it on, and you see some little pale, dim light. Oh, well, I guess I forgot to change the batteries. I can't see anything. Well, that's what happens if we have to keep our spiritual lights charged up. There's going to have to be some work at it. Or else our light is going to go dim and go completely out. That means we're going to have to spend some time in the Word. Scriptures. We need to come together. That's one of the things. We not only are worshiping our God, glorifying our God here this morning, we're trying to re-energize ourselves and charge ourselves back up so that when we go back into the world, our light is shining so that everyone around us can see it. Our co-workers, our neighbors, family. Failing to explain the truth to others. Peter said that we need to always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that lies within us. Someone asks you the question, why do you believe in God? What are you going to say? You don't have to be a theologian, you don't have to be a scholar, you don't have to have all kinds of degrees after your name, initials, to be able to answer that question. Why do you believe in God? Why are you a Christian? Why do you read the Bible? Why do you go to church every Sunday? We should be able to answer those. And, I think we need to think about that a little bit. Maybe do a little bit of study and reflection, do some prayer on it so that we're ready. And sometimes, we don't have to talk for 20 minutes, give a 20-minute sermonette to try to explain ourselves. Sometimes in just a few sentences, we can express our feelings. And then who knows, it maybe give them something that we're shining a light on them. And they might say, wow, that's pretty good. I'd like to know more about that. And so it may open some doors to us. We turn our lights off when we ignore the needs of others. Sometimes we get so preoccupied with our own life. I've got so many problems of my own, and I'm kind of down, and I don't have the energy or the time to deal with anyone else. But yet throughout the New Testament and in the church, we see that God expects us as Christians to be helpful to other people. We can't ignore the needs of others. We need to try to be attentive. And by doing that, in a way, we're letting our light shine. By letting them know that we care. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, as it goes in that children's song. Are you going to let your light shine? Are you going to let your light shine? If it hasn't been shining, if it's been a little dim, maybe you put a bushel. Put something over, some kind of a cover over your light. Maybe you've allowed the old devil to blow it out. Well, you can light it again. You can turn it up with God's help. Perhaps we have one in our audience here this morning that is subject in some way to the invitation. If you're not a Christian, we'd encourage you to come forward, repent of your sins, confess that you believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and then we can immerse you in the waters of baptism. Maybe you're a Christian, you've lost your way,